So the first thing we're going to watch is a clip from a 2010 Gotham home game, Queens versus Manhattan. I picked this because I think it brings up a lot of interesting issues about how we enforce rules, what the rules are, what they should be, what impact is. It brings up a whole bunch of interesting questions along those lines. So what I want you to do is, this is the last jam of a very close game. And those of you who don't know, Gotham has a 3-game regular home season. So once you've lost your second game, you're pretty much done for the year. And I believe both of these teams have lost one game. So again, last jam of a close game. Let's keep your eye on the Queen's jammer, number 55 in black. That's Susie Hot Rod. And let's watch her closely and see what happens.
Yeah, both of the box sendings happened very early in the jam. So that's what.
Right here.
Dash right there.
Okay. So we all saw that. Susie sort of hand-checked the Manhattan blocker, who was Sweetheart, and got sent to the box. And the first question I have about that, and we can stop watching the clip now. The first question I have about this for y'all is, like, do we believe in ticky-tack calls? And if so, is that a ticky-tack call? What do y'all think?
I mean, one thing I would point out about this, because I think we were still in minors land at this point, is that was not a fourth minor. That was called as a major.
Yes, it was a major.
You can, as you imagine, I was there and I have opinions, so I'm going to leave it to others.
That's actually, I think, an important distinction to make, because I think I have mixed feelings on calling things ticky-tack, because I think that it can be used to, it is both a correct thing to say you don't want to be ticky-tack about things, and also can be used to just generally be like, I didn't like this call, it was too ticky-tack. But here, what I think is really important about that is, like, the difference between a minor and a major is a penalty versus a quarter of a penalty, right? Basically. And that minor basically was where the ticky-tack call should have fallen. If you're thinking about a borderline call, why is it a major instead of a minor? I don't know. And I wasn't, like, this is not even talking about this specific clip.
For the sake of this discussion, let's pretend that there weren't minors, that this was called as a major. I just want to know, in other sports that they talk about, the game was, you could argue that the game was kind of decided on this call. And, you could also argue that it wasn't decided on this call. And the thing is, some sports you hear people talk about, well, if it's near the end of the game and if it would decide the game, you better be really sure it's real obvious before you make the call.
I think, like, if we're talking about other sports and how exactly going to be in, like, game deciding calls, you don't need, like, baseball, you don't even have to look at the end of the game, right? If a batter's facing a 3-0 count, almost certainly that next pitch is going to be a strike, because the umpires would rather not decide if somebody walks or goes down for the players. They'd rather the player decide that, right? So
we also,
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, we have a question from the chat. Amy is asking us, can you clarify what you mean by ticky-tack? Technically against the rules, but not obviously game-changing or against the spirit of the rule.
That's exactly that's what I would call ticky-tack. Yeah, that's perfect.
I would say those times when we talk about things being technically correct, with the emphasis, with the, like, quotes around technically.
I mean, the nature of a major is that it is supposed to have impact, like, and not just in terms of, like, whether somebody gets sent to the box, but in terms of, like, did the actual action have impact?
Yeah,
I think it did. I think it was a tap.
Like, looking at the play.
But what is impact in roller derby too? Or it's like, did that hand help Susie gain position on Swede in this case? And honestly, like, I can barely see it because the resolution's low, and I think that it was, maybe like a small maneuver. But I think in roller derby in particular, you don't want officials to like decide what, like to like judge on what someone's spirit is. It's really about impact.
Right.
I also, what troubles me is making calls differently at the beginning of the game than you would at the end of the game.
Yeah.
And I think having consistent officiating not only is more fair, and like obviously you tighten up, you like figure out what you're doing within the first like 10, 15 minutes of the game. And like then hopefully you're pretty even throughout, or sooner if it's a home game and you've been working with that crew forever. But I think that it is better to be consistent and therefore have skaters be able to anticipate what referee calls are going to be and be able to adapt to what referee calls are going to be than to change the calls because of the impact on the game at the very end.
I 100% agree with that. Like as a skater, you're you're going to be adjusting to the game as it's called, and you may like or not like whether it's being like called really tight or called loosely. But after the first few minutes of the game, you have an expectation of how it's going to be called. And I think it would definitely be a bad idea to like suspend however you've been calling it for the last couple of jams.
Right.
Jill, you've been trying. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, as an official, I often don't know how close the game is at that point. I may look at the scoreboard at the end and instantly forget that that's what the score is, because I just don't want that to affect the way I call something. I don't want to say either way, I don't want to call this penalty that happened or didn't happen if that's going to affect the final score. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, the number of games that I've worked that were close where I forget who won is like,
right.
I mean, and seriously, because I will look at the scoreboard primarily for time, and then I'll say, look at the score and be like, oh, this game is close. Be sure to look at these things in this way because people play differently in a close game when like people do play differently based on the score. And like you might see different penalties at the end of the game that you would at the beginning when people are tired, whatever. But like that's the information I'm retaining. It's not who is winning, what the score is exactly, unless I am, for whatever reason, trying to help a jammer ref or jammer refing myself. Otherwise, like the score is not on my mind.
I feel like, and Smacker, real quick before I make my comment, can you remind me what year this is?
2010.
2010. Okay. So like 2010, right? Roller derby restarts in 2004. For most people, maybe 2005. And most of us didn't know how to skate. I think that we were figuring out how to officiate and how to skate at the same time. And one thing I'm seeing in this clip is, if you watch the bigger picture of Swede and Susie, and I forget who the third person in that block was, right?
It was Fisty, and it was actually Pi.
Okay.
She was
right. So like none of that looks like it's caused by a forearm, although I can see where the referee thought Susie pushed Swede one way and thus helped herself get around the other blocker. You can see how that looks like that, but not being as skilled as skaters ourselves and not looking at the big picture, it's easy to miss that like it really may not have had any impact at all. And I think that that's something we're looking at in roller derby is just a lack of experience with the game still even today, right? 15, 16 years on.
Go ahead.
To me, like, impact for me in that scenario, in a forearm scenario, is did you get past because you used your forearm? And I think, something like a tap is sort of an interesting thought because did that somehow help you stay upright? Does that count as impact? Like, I think, those at that point, we were still working things like that.
Well, I mean, honestly, this is the question that gets asked about forearms for the next.
Yep.
Honestly, I would say decade, except for we took last year off. Like, this is the eternal question about forearms.
But then it does go back to Bollocks's initial point about this being a relatively minor impact. And because you can't read one's mind, like certainly there's a psychological element to roller derby strategy, and a tap can get you past a wall. But is that really something that like the officiating administration should be making a determination upon? I
Right.
don't know.
Like there's a regular debate that comes up specifically with newer officials about if I use my forearm to tap somebody on the shoulder, and so they turn that direction while I go the other, like around on the other side, didn't that forearm get me past? And no, I mean, but it's hard with the way our rules are written, right?